Princess Kira stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, her crystal armor reflecting the cold light from 1,000 stars visible through the transparent dome above her head. 3 years of war had brought her to this moment. 3 years of watching her people die in battles against an enemy they had underestimated from the very beginning. The humans sat across the negotiation table, their delegation small compared to the Valoran representatives who filled half the chamber. Kira's eyes moved across their faces, searching for signs of triumph or arrogance. But she found only tired expressions that mirrored her own exhaustion. Princess Kira, the council mediator, began, his translator device rendering his words in perfect Valoran. The terms have been discussed for 6 months now, and both sides have agreed to the framework. What remains is the final symbolic gesture that will bind your peoples together in lasting peace. Kira knew what was coming. The ancient tradition had been whispered about in her court for weeks, debated by advisors who could barely hide their disgust at the suggestion. A political marriage, the oldest form of alliance in the galaxy, now proposed between a Valoran princess and a human representative. "We present Daniel Griffin," the human ambassador said, gesturing to a man who stood from his seat with quiet grace. He was unremarkable by any standard Kira could see, appearing to be in his early 30s, with brown eyes that held a calmness she found almost unsettling given the circumstances. Daniel wore simple formal clothing in dark colors, nothing like the elaborate uniforms of the other human military officers present. He walked to the center of the chamber and bowed to Kira in the Valoran style, his movements precise and respectful. "Your Highness," Daniel said, his voice steady and low, "I understand this arrangement is not what either of us would have chosen under different circumstances. I want you to know that I will honor whatever boundaries you set, and I will work every day to prove that this alliance can bring real peace to both our peoples." Kira studied him carefully. She had expected arrogance, or at least some display of human superiority, but this man showed neither. He simply stood there, waiting for her response with patience that seemed genuine. "The Valoran Empire accepts these terms," Kira heard herself say, the words feeling heavy in her mouth. Her father, the Emperor, had made it clear that she had no real choice in this matter. Not if she wanted to save the millions of Valarans still at risk in the ongoing conflict. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of ceremonies and preparations. Kira learned small things about her future husband during brief encounters, arranged by their handlers. Daniel enjoyed reading about history. He exercised for 2 hours each morning, and he spoke 4 galactic languages fluently in addition to several Earth dialects. What struck Kira most was how the other humans treated Daniel. She noticed it during a reception when a high-ranking human admiral approached him and addressed him with a level of deference that seemed excessive for a mere diplomatic representative. When she asked Daniel about his rank, he simply said he used to work in security. The wedding ceremony combined traditions from both worlds. Kira wore her family's ancient crystal armor, each piece carved from the sacred stones of Valora's northern mountains, while Daniel appeared in traditional Earth formal wear that seemed plain by comparison. Thousands attended either in person or through holographic projection. Kira spoke the binding words in Valoran, and Daniel repeated them in accented but correct pronunciation. When the final blessing was given, they were officially married under the laws of both their peoples. The reception that followed was enormous, with representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations offering congratulations and political pleasantries. Kira maintained her composure through hours of speeches and toasts, always aware of Daniel standing beside her, his presence quiet but somehow reassuring during a brief moment alone. Daniel touched her arm gently and said, "You don't have to pretend to be happy about this when it's just us. I know what you sacrificed, and I respect that." Kira found herself surprised by his directness. "What did you sacrifice?" she asked, realizing she had never considered what this arrangement might cost him personally. My privacy. Mostly, Daniel replied with a slight smile. And the quiet life I was trying to build after my previous work. But if this marriage helps end the war, then it's worth it. That night, in the quarters they were expected to share, Daniel was respectful to the point of being distant. He offered to sleep in a separate room, suggesting they could maintain appearances in public while keeping their private lives. Separate Kira surprised herself by declining, not because she wanted intimacy with this stranger, but because something about his careful respect made her curious about who he really was beneath the diplomatic mask. They talked for hours instead, sharing stories about their childhoods on vastly different worlds. Daniel described Earth's oceans and mountains, the dangerous wildlife and extreme weather that shaped human evolution. Kira told him about Valora's crystal caves and the ancient traditions that governed her people's honor-based society. Why did you agree to this? Kira finally asked as the station's artificial night cycle deepened around them. Daniel was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I've seen enough war to last 1,000 lifetimes, he said softly. And because I thought maybe I could help build something instead of just tearing things down. Kira felt something shift in her perception of this human. He wasn't just a political tool or a symbolic gesture. He was someone who had experienced loss and was trying to find meaning in this strange arrangement just as she was. The peaceful period lasted. Exactly 12 days. News arrived through emergency channels that made Kira's blood run cold. A rogue Valoran military faction led by General Thane had rejected the peace treaty and launched an attack on a human agricultural colony in the frontier sectors. The reports were devastating. 2,000 human civilians dead, most of them farmers and their families who had no military defenses. The rebels had used Valoran warships and weapons, making it impossible for the Empire to deny responsibility. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Kira's father, the Emperor, was given an ultimatum. Control your rogue military forces, or face economic sanctions and possible expulsion from the Council. I will send 3 battle groups, the Emperor announced. General Thane and his followers will be brought to justice under Valoran military law. That could take months, the human ambassador protested, and cost thousands more lives on both sides. Our people are demanding immediate action. Daniel, who had been sitting quietly beside Kira throughout the session, suddenly spoke up. If the council permits, I would like to go myself, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge Kira had not heard before. The chamber fell silent. Several council members looked confused, clearly wondering why a diplomatic representative would volunteer for what was essentially a military operation. The human ambassador's expression shifted to something Kira could not quite read: concern, mixed with resignation perhaps. Ambassador Griffin, the human representative said carefully, "Are you certain this is the appropriate response?" "I believe it is," Daniel replied, looking directly at Kira as he spoke. "This is my chance to show that our marriage represents more than just paperwork. Let me help resolve this crisis." Kira felt a chill run down her spine. Something in Daniel's eyes had changed, something that made her realize she knew almost nothing about the man she had married. Kira insisted on accompanying Daniel to the rebel-held sector, ignoring the protests from both Valoran and human advisors who argued it was too dangerous for someone of her status. She told them that as Daniel's wife and a princess of the Valoran Empire, she had every right to be present when her people were brought to justice. The real reason, the one she did not voice aloud, was that she needed to understand who Daniel Griffin really was. Something about the way the human delegation had reacted to his volunteer offer troubled her deeply. The human government assigned them a small diplomatic vessel called the Endeavor, with a crew of only 8 humans who treated Daniel with a level of respect that bordered on fear. Kira noticed how they moved aside when he walked through corridors. how they spoke to him in careful tones usually reserved for high military commanders. The journey to the rebel stronghold would take 3 days through hyperspace. Kira spent the first day reviewing intelligence reports on General Thane's forces, trying to calculate how many Valoran lives would be lost when her father's battle groups arrived to subdue the rebellion on the second day. She went looking for Daniel and found him in the ship's small gym, moving through combat forms unlike anything she had ever witnessed. His movements were fluid, but carried devastating power, each strike precise enough to shatter reinforced metal. "How long have you trained?" Kira asked from the doorway, startling Daniel, who had been so focused he had not heard her approach. "Since I was 7, Daniel replied, grabbing a towel and wiping sweat from his face. "All humans from Earth learn combat basics as children. The world we evolved on doesn't allow weakness." Kira had heard the stories about Earth, the so-called Death World that produced these strange, resilient humans. But she had always assumed the tales were exaggerated for propaganda purposes. "Tell me about your world," she said. Surprising herself with genuine curiosity, Daniel smiled and began describing Earth in detail. He talked about hurricanes that could destroy entire cities, earthquakes that reshaped continents, and predators that hunted humans throughout their evolutionary history. "We had to become adaptable," Daniel explained, "because everything on Earth was trying to kill us. The weather, the animals, even the plants in some regions. Humans learned to survive by being tougher and more persistent than anything else on the planet." The way Daniel spoke about casually surviving natural disasters and avoiding deadly creatures made Kira reconsider everything she thought she knew about human capabilities. If their homeworld was truly that harsh, then perhaps the stories about human resilience were not exaggerations after all. On the third day, they arrived at the rebel stronghold. It was a massive asteroid base in the Talon sector, heavily fortified with shield generators and weapon platforms. Sensors show approximately 5,000 Valoran soldiers inside, the Endeavor's captain reported. A woman named Lisa Chun, who had barely spoken to Kira during the entire journey. "They have 12 warships docked and another 20 support vessels. General Thane is broadcasting a message on all channels." The holographic display showed General Thane in full military regalia, his scales gleaming with traditional war paint. "Princess Kira," he began, his voice dripping with contempt, "you shame our people by marrying this human creature. The Valoran Empire was foolish to seek peace with an inferior species that should have been conquered, not negotiated with." Kira felt rage building in her chest. Thane had been her father's trusted general once, before his extremist views made him impossible to control. "You have 1 hour to leave this sector," Thane continued, "or I will open fire on your vessel and remove the stain you have become to our proud warrior culture." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Kira knew that her father's battle groups were still 2 days away, and this small diplomatic ship had no weapons capable of threatening the rebel stronghold. "Kira," Daniel said softly, using her name without title for the first time, "I need you to trust me. Please stay on the ship and wait in orbit while I handle this." "Handle what exactly?" Kira demanded, feeling frustrated by his calm demeanor in the face of overwhelming odds. "You are 1 man against 5,000 soldiers and a dozen warships. What can you possibly do?" Daniel looked at Lisa Chun, who nodded slightly. "Princess Kira deserves to know," the captain said quietly. "Know what?" Kira felt her confusion turning to anger. "What are you both hiding from me?" "I will show you," Daniel said, moving toward the shuttle bay. "Watch the sensors and you will understand. I promise I will answer all your questions when this is over." Kira followed him to the bay where a small combat shuttle waited. Daniel put on a suit of armor unlike any Valoran design she recognized. It was sleek and black, covered in systems she could not identify. "Daniel, wait!" Kira called out, but he was already boarding the shuttle. She ran back to the bridge and watched the sensors as the small craft detached from the Endeavor and began approaching the asteroid base. General Thane's forces immediately responded. Weapons locked onto the shuttle from every defensive platform surrounding the base. Kira held her breath as she watched missiles launch, dozens of them, all converging on Daniel's position. "He's going to die," Kira whispered, horror filling her as she realized she had just sent her husband to his death. The first missile struck the shuttle directly. Kira expected to see an explosion, the brief flash that would mark the end of Daniel Griffin's life. Instead, she saw the shuttle continue forward through the blast, completely undamaged. Debris scattered around it as more missiles impacted, but the craft kept moving as if the weapons were nothing more than rain. How? Kira breathed, unable to comprehend what she was witnessing. The shuttle reached the asteroid's surface and opened. Daniel emerged in his black armor and began walking toward the main hangar entrance. The rebels fired everything they had: plasma cannons, railguns, energy weapons that should have vaporized him instantly. Daniel walked through all of it. Kira watched on the sensors as weapon after weapon struck him and failed to even slow his steady advance. "Captain Chen," Kira said, her voice shaking. "What is he?" Lisa Chen was silent for a long moment before responding. "He is a sentinel," she said finally. "One of 12 humans who volunteered for experimental augmentation during our species' darkest hour. The program was designed to create soldiers who could turn the tide of battles." Single-handedly, Kira felt the deck beneath her feet seem to shift. "You sent a weapon," she whispered. "Humanity married me to a living weapon." "No," Lisa said firmly. "We sent Daniel because he volunteered. He wanted to prove to you that he could be more than what he was made to be. He wanted you to know him as a person before you learned what he could do." On the screen, Daniel had reached the hangar doors. He placed both hands against the reinforced metal and simply pushed. The doors, designed to withstand orbital bombardment, crumpled like paper under his grip. Kira watched in stunned silence as her husband disappeared into the rebel base. She had married a human thinking. She understood what that meant. She had been wrong about everything. Kira demanded answers, her voice sharp with betrayal and fear as she turned to face Captain Lisa Chen. "Tell me everything," she said. "No more secrets, no more carefully chosen words. I want to know exactly what my husband is and what he can do." Lisa Chen gestured to the observation deck where they could watch the sensor feeds in privacy. Once there, she began explaining in a voice that carried the weight of terrible history. 20 years ago, Lisa started, humanity had just begun expanding beyond our solar system. We were naive and hopeful, expecting to find peaceful civilizations or perhaps no one at all. Instead, we found ourselves outmatched by nearly every species we encountered. Kira listened as Lisa described the early years of human space exploration. Colony after colony was lost to territorial disputes, misunderstandings, and outright aggression from species that viewed humans as primitives. We were dying. Lisa continued, her eyes distant with painful memories. Whole settlements wiped out because we did not have the technology or the numbers to defend ourselves. The Valaran Empire was not our only enemy in those days. There were others, worse than your people ever were. The Sentinel program, Lisa explained, was born from desperation. Human scientists combined experimental technology with biological augmentation, creating soldiers who could survive in conditions that would kill anyone else. 12 volunteers underwent the process, Lisa said quietly. All of them military personnel who had lost family or friends in the conflicts. They knew the risks: 30% chance of death, 50% chance of permanent disability, only 20% chance of success. All 12 survived. But the transformation changed them in ways that went beyond the physical enhancements. They became faster, stronger, and more durable than any known life form. Their minds, processed information at speeds that rivaled artificial intelligence. They could generate personal energy shields through a combination of implanted technology and altered biology. Daniel was the third to complete the program, Lisa said, pulling up his file on the display. Before volunteering, he was a rescue specialist who watched helpless as pirates destroyed a civilian transport. He could not save anyone because he was just one normal human against dozens of armed attackers. Kira studied the images of Daniel before the transformation. He looked younger, more vulnerable, with eyes that held a different kind of pain than what she saw in him now on the main sensors. They watched Daniel move through the rebel base. Security feeds showed him encountering the first wave of defenders, dozens of Valoran soldiers who opened fire the moment they saw him. Daniel moved like liquid lightning. He dodged some shots, absorbed others on his armor, and closed the distance before the rebels could retreat. His strikes were precise and controlled, each one designed to disable weapons and incapacitate without killing. "He's holding back," Kira realized aloud, watching as Daniel carefully avoided lethal force even when the rebels were trying desperately to kill him. "He always holds back," Lisa confirmed. "All the Sentinels do. They know what they are capable of, and they know that their real power is not in destruction, but in the choice to show restraint." The rebels sealed blast doors and flooded corridors with combat drones. Kira counted over 300 automated weapons converging on Daniel's position, each one programmed to kill. Daniel raised one hand and energy crackled around his armor. The drone's weapons fire seemed to bend around him, deflected by shields that became visible only when struck. He moved through the mechanical army like a force of nature, dismantling drones with efficient precision. "How many people know about the Sentinels?" Kira asked, unable to look away from the screens. "Every human government official and most military personnel," Lisa replied, "but we have kept it secret from the galactic community. We feared that if other species knew what we created, they would see us as a threat rather than potential allies." Kira understood the logic but felt the sting of deception nonetheless. "So you married me to one of your greatest weapons and hoped I would never find out?" "No," Lisa said firmly, meeting Kira's eyes directly. "Daniel volunteered specifically because he wanted you to know him first, before you learned what he could do. He hoped that by the time you discovered the truth, you would see that his power does not define who he is as a person." Deep in the rebel base, Daniel had reached the command center. General Thane stood with his personal guard, 50 of the finest Valoran warriors, all armed with plasma blades and honor-bound to die protecting their commander. Through the audio feeds, Kira heard Thane's voice. "So the humans send their demons," the general said. "I should have known they would not negotiate in good faith. They created monsters and pretended to want peace." "General Thane," Daniel replied, his voice calm despite the weapons pointed at him. "I am here to offer you one chance to surrender. Your soldiers will be treated fairly under Valoran military law, and no one else needs to die today." "Die?" Thane laughed bitterly. "You think you can kill all of us, human? You think your tricks and armor make you invincible?" "I know I can," Daniel said quietly, "but I would prefer not to. I respect Valoran warrior culture too much to dishonor you with an easy victory. I challenge you to single combat, as your traditions allow." Kira felt her breath catch. Daniel was offering Thane a way to surrender with honor, using Valoran customs to end the confrontation without unnecessary bloodshed. Thane considered for a long moment before nodding. "I accept," he said, drawing his ceremonial blade. "When I defeat you, human, your death will prove that we should have never made peace with your kind." The personal guard formed a circle as tradition demanded. Kira watched, knowing that Thane had 2 centuries of combat experience and had never lost a duel in his entire military career. The fight began. It lasted 8 seconds. Thane moved with awe, the skill and speed that had made him legendary among Valoran warriors. His blade traced patterns that should have been impossible to defend against. Attacks designed to overwhelm any opponent, Daniel moved faster. He did not block or parry, but simply was not where Thane's blade struck. He flowed around the attacks like water, making the general's centuries of experience meaningless. On the 6th second, Daniel stepped inside Thane's guard. On the 7th second, he caught the general's wrist and twisted. On the 8th second, Thane was on the ground, disarmed and defeated, with Daniel's hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Yield," Daniel said softly, "and I promise you will face justice, but not execution. Your warriors will be spared, and this rebellion will end without more death." Thane stared up at Daniel with shock and something that looked almost like respect. "I yield," he said finally, the words clearly painful to speak. Daniel helped the general to his feet and turned to address the personal guard. "General Thane has surrendered honorably under your traditions," he announced. "You are all free to lay down your weapons and accept the Empire's judgment, or you can fight me one by one until none of you remain standing. I prefer the first option." One by one, the warriors dropped their weapons. Kira watched through tears. She did not fully understand. Tears of relief, perhaps, or tears from witnessing power wielded with such careful mercy. Daniel activated a communication channel to the entire base. "This is Daniel Griffin," he said, his voice broadcasting through every speaker. "General Thane has been defeated in honorable combat, and the rebellion is over. I took no lives today because I respect your culture and your honor. I could have destroyed this entire base in minutes, but I chose restraint because I believe in the peace your princes helped create." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I ask you all to honor the treaty your empire signed. Return to your families, return to your lives, and help build the future that this alliance makes possible." Within an hour, every rebel on the base had surrendered. Within 3 hours, every other rebel faction scattered across the sector had broadcast their intention to lay down arms. Kira stood on the bridge of the Endeavor, watching as Daniel returned to the ship. She did not know whether to embrace him or fear him. She knew only that everything had changed, and she could never see her husband the same way again. Daniel entered the bridge still wearing his black armor, the material showing no signs of damage despite the thousands of weapons that had struck it during the assault. Kira stood frozen, uncertain how to react to this man who was her husband, but also something far beyond her understanding. "Kira," Daniel began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "Not here," she said quietly, acutely aware of the crew watching their interaction. "Our quarters now. You owe me answers and I will have them in private." They walked through the corridors in silence. Crew members pressed themselves against walls as Daniel passed, their fear and respect so obvious it made Kira's stomach turn. She wondered if she would look at him with that same fear after their conversation ended. Once inside their shared quarters, Daniel removed his armor piece by piece, revealing the simple clothing underneath. He looked tired, Kira noticed, truly exhausted in a way she had not seen before. "Ask me anything," Daniel said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "I will tell you everything truthfully. You deserve that much after what you just witnessed. Why did you not tell me before we married?" Kira's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Did you think I would refuse if I knew what you were?" "Yes," Daniel answered simply, "and I would not have blamed you. Who would choose to marry someone like me if they had any other option?" The raw honesty in his voice caught Kira off guard. She had expected justifications or political explanations, not this vulnerable admission. "What are you exactly?" she asked, forcing herself to approach the topic methodically. "Captain Chan explained the Sentinel program, but I want to hear it from you. What did they do to make you like this?" Daniel took a deep breath before answering. "They rebuilt me at the cellular level," he said, replacing normal human biology with enhanced versions. My bones are reinforced with metallic compounds. My muscles can exert force beyond natural limits. My nervous system processes information faster than artificial computers. He continued explaining the technical details. The energy shields generated through implanted reactors that drew power from his own metabolism. The healing factors that could repair almost any injury given enough time. The enhanced senses that made him aware of threats before they materialized. But the physical changes were only part of it. Daniel added quietly. The psychological effects were something the scientists did not anticipate. When you become this powerful, you start seeing the world differently. Normal problems seem trivial, normal people seem fragile, and you realize that you will outlive almost everyone you care about. How long? Kira asked, a new fear forming in her mind. The scientists estimate we could live for 3 or 4 centuries. Daniel said, meeting her eyes. Maybe longer. They do not really know because the program is only 20 years old. Kira felt the implications crash over her. Even if their marriage became real, even if she grew to love this strange human, she would age and die while he remained young. If one human can do what you did today, Kira said slowly, working through the terrifying logic, what could 12 of you do together? What could humanity do if they deployed all the Sentinels at once? We could conquer the known galaxy in less than a year, Daniel answered, his voice flat and emotionless. We ran the simulations during the war with your people. 12 Sentinels, properly deployed, could destroy every Valoran military installation and cripple your entire defense infrastructure before your government could mount an effective response. The casual way he stated this horrified Kira more than the words themselves. Then why? She demanded. Why make peace? Why marry me instead of just taking what you wanted? Daniel stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. Because conquest is easy, he said softly. And because we created the Sentinels to defend humanity, not to enslave other species. We had seen enough empires built on subjugation. We did not want to become what we were fighting against. He turned to face Kira again. The Sentinel program was supposed to be temporary, he continued. A desperate measure to survive until we could build proper defenses. But once we existed, the government realized they had created something they could not control or eliminate. What do you mean? Kira asked. They cannot order us to do anything we genuinely oppose, Daniel explained, not without risking us turning against them. We are too powerful to imprison, too dangerous to kill, and too independent to manipulate. So they made a choice. They asked us what we wanted to do with our power. 3 of the original 12 Sentinels had died in the years since the program's completion. Daniel described each loss with quiet reverence. Patricia Sterling died holding a collapsing building together for 6 hours while civilians evacuated underneath. Nathan Price sacrificed himself, destroying an asteroid on a collision course with a human colony. Victoria Hayes gave her life stopping a reactor meltdown that would have killed millions. The rest of us scattered across human space, Daniel said, each choosing our own path. Some work in government, using their strategic minds to prevent conflicts. Some explore unknown regions, mapping dangerous territories. Some protect colonies on the frontier where threats still exist. And you chose diplomacy, Kira said. Beginning to understand, I chose to try building something instead of just preventing destruction, Daniel confirmed. I have spent 15 years fighting, killing when necessary, watching friends die because I could not be everywhere at once. When your father proposed the marriage alliance, I volunteered immediately because I wanted to prove that even someone like me could contribute to peace. Kira sat down, her mind overwhelmed by everything she had learned. Does it hurt? She asked suddenly, not sure why this question emerged from all the others she could have asked. Daniel looked surprised by the question. Does what hurt? Being what you are, Kira clarified. Having all that power but choosing not to use it. Watching normal people struggle with problems you could solve in seconds. Knowing you will live for centuries while everyone around you ages and dies, does it hurt? For the first time since entering the quarters, Daniel's careful control wavered. His expression showed genuine pain, the kind that came from years of carrying burdens too heavy to share. Yes, he admitted, every single day. I watch humans struggle with tasks I could complete effortlessly, and I have to step back and let them try. I see injustice and suffering that I could end with violence, but I have to find peaceful solutions instead. I make friends knowing I will attend their funerals. He paused, collecting himself before continuing. The hardest part is not the physical limitations, Daniel said. It is the isolation. I can be in a room full of people and know that none of them truly understand what it means to be like this. Even the other sentinels are scattered across the galaxy. We rarely see each other because our presence together makes normal people too uncomfortable. Kira felt something shift in her chest. She had been so focused on her own fear and anger that she had not considered what Daniel's existence must be like for him. Is that why you wanted me to know you first? She asked gently. Before I learned about your power, you wanted someone who might see you as a person instead of a weapon? Yes, Daniel said simply, and the vulnerability in that single word broke through the last of Kira's defensive anger. She stood and crossed the room to where he stood. She did not embrace him, she was not ready for that, but she placed her hand on his arm and felt the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. I cannot promise I will not fear what you can do, Kira said honestly, and I cannot promise this marriage will become real in the way either of us might want. But I promise I will try to see you as Daniel, not just as a sentinel. Daniel covered her hand with his own. That is all I could ask for, he said quietly. They stood together in silence. Two people from different worlds, trying to bridge a gap wider than the space between their planets. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled past as the Endeavor began its journey back to the Valoran capital. They both knew that the coming days would bring challenges neither could predict. But for this moment, they had found something fragile but real understanding, and perhaps the beginning of trust. News of Daniel's actions spread across both empires within hours. By the time the Endeavor reached Valoran space, every major news network in the galaxy was broadcasting footage of a single human defeating 5,000 rebel soldiers without taking a single life. The reactions were as divided as Kira had feared. Some Valorans felt humiliated that their warriors had been so easily defeated, their military pride shattered by the revelation of human capabilities they had never imagined. Some humans worried that Daniel had revealed too much, exposing secrets that should have remained hidden, but the majority of citizens on both sides felt something unexpected hope. If someone so powerful could choose restraint and mercy, if someone capable of destruction chose to build peace instead, then perhaps this strange alliance could actually work. Kira returned to the Valoran capital to face her father and the royal court. The summons came within an hour of her arrival, the Emperor demanding her presence in the grand throne room where the entire noble assembly had gathered. She entered alone, having asked Daniel to wait while she handled her people's reaction first. Hundreds of Valoran nobles filled the tiered seating, their expressions ranging from outrage to fear to barely concealed disgust. Princess Kira, her father began, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. You stand before this court to answer for the deception perpetrated by humanity. They married you to a weapon, a genetic abomination, and did not reveal his true nature until after the alliance was formalized. Father, Kira replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves. I was not deceived. I was given the opportunity to know Daniel as a person before learning about his capabilities. There is a difference. Lord Vex, one of the most conservative nobles, stood from his seat. You defend the creature? He spat. You defend the humans who created monsters and hid them from the galactic community? I defend my husband, Kira said firmly, who could have killed every rebel on that asteroid but chose to spare them all, who defeated General Thane in single combat but helped him to his feet afterward, who showed more honor and restraint than most of the warriors in this room would have managed. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Nobles shouted over each other, some demanding the marriage be annulled, others calling for military action against humanity before more of their weapons could be revealed. Kira waited for the chaos to subside before speaking again. "I have a question for this assembly," she said loudly, cutting through the noise. "If humanity wanted to conquer the Valoran Empire, why did they not send their sentinels 3 years ago? Why did they waste time with diplomacy and negotiations?" The question hung in the air. Lord Vex tried to respond but found himself without a good answer. "I will tell you why," Kira continued. "Because they did not want conquest, they wanted peace. They could have destroyed our military installations, crippled our defenses, and forced our surrender. Instead, they sent diplomats and sought alliance through proper channels." She paused, making eye contact with as many nobles as she could. "Daniel volunteered to marry me knowing I would eventually discover what he was," Kira said. "He did this because he wanted to prove that even someone with terrible power could choose to build rather than destroy. He wanted to show us that strength without wisdom is meaningless." "Pretty words," another noble called out. "But they do not change the fact that humanity created weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. How can we trust them?" Before Kira could respond, the throne room doors opened. General Thane entered, flanked by guards but not in chains. He had been released from custody specifically to attend this assembly. The chamber fell silent as Thane approached the throne and knelt before the Emperor. "Your Majesty," he said, "I have come to speak on behalf of the human Daniel Griffin." "You were his enemy," the Emperor said, surprised. "Why would you defend him now?" "Because he taught me the difference between strength and honor," Thane replied, rising to his full height. "I challenged him expecting to die gloriously in battle, believing that death in combat was the highest achievement a warrior could reach." Thane turned to address the assembled nobles. "Daniel Griffin defeated me in 8 seconds, he said bluntly. 8 seconds to dismantle centuries of training and experience. He could have killed me, and by all logic of warfare, he should have. I was a rebel, a threat, someone who had murdered 2,000 humans." The general's voice grew stronger. "But he did not kill me. He did not even seriously injure me. Instead, he helped me to my feet and offered me a chance at justice rather than execution. That is not the action of a weapon. That is the action of someone who understands that true power lies in choosing when not to use force." Kira felt gratitude wash over her. Thane's words carried weight that hers could not. Coming from a respected military leader rather than a princess defending her marriage, Lord Vex was not ready to concede. One act of mercy does not erase the fact that humans created these abominations in secret, he argued. What else are they hiding from us? Then ask them, Kira suggested. Invite the human delegation to address this assembly. Let them explain the Sentinel program directly. Transparency is the foundation of trust. Her father considered this before nodding. Send for the human ambassador, he ordered. Within an hour, the human delegation arrived. They brought technical specifications, historical records, and most importantly, they brought honesty. The lead human diplomat, an older woman named Catherine Ross, stood before the Valoran assembly and told them everything. She explained the desperate circumstances that led to the Sentinel program, the ethical debates within human government about creating such powerful individuals, and the decision to keep the program secret out of fear of galactic reaction. We were wrong to hide this from you, Catherine admitted. But understand that we come from a species that spent most of its history being hunted, conquered, or dismissed as primitives. The Sentinels represented our best chance at survival, and we feared that revealing them would make us targets rather than allies. She pulled up holographic displays showing the other Sentinels and their current assignments. Some worked in disaster relief, using their strength to save lives during natural catastrophes. Others explored dangerous regions of space that would kill normal humans. One ran a hospital on a frontier world. "These are not weapons," Catherine said, gesturing to the images. "These are people who volunteered to become more than human so that humanity could survive. They have saved more lives than they have taken, and every one of them chose their current path instead of using their power for domination." The presentation continued for 2 hours. By the end, even the most skeptical nobles had to acknowledge that humanity's creation of the Sentinels, while alarming, did not represent an immediate threat to Valoran security. The Emperor stood, signaling the end of the assembly. "This court will take time to deliberate on these revelations," he announced, "but I will say this General Thane's testimony carries weight, as does my daughter's defense of her husband. Perhaps we judge too quickly based on fear rather than evidence." 6 months passed. Kira and Daniel established a joint cultural center on a neutral station in the border region between human and Valoran space. The facility served as a place where both species could learn about each other, share art and music, and work on collaborative projects. Their marriage, which had begun as pure political necessity, slowly evolved into something more genuine. Kira discovered that Daniel had a passion for ancient Valoran poetry and could recite verses in flawless classical dialect. Daniel learned that Kira possessed a brilliant strategic mind and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard regularly. They were not in love. Not yet, but they had built partnership based on mutual respect and growing understanding. Kira no longer feared Daniel's power because she had seen how carefully he controlled it, how much effort he put into being gentle despite his strength. On a quiet evening in their quarters at the cultural center, they sat together reviewing applications from young Valorans and humans who wanted to study at the facility. The response had been overwhelming, with thousands of applicants from both species eager to learn. "We are making progress," Kira said, signing off on another acceptance letter. "Slowly, but it is real," Daniel nodded, then paused as an alert appeared on his communication device. His expression shifted to concern as he read the message. "What is it?" Kira asked, recognizing the change in his demeanor. "Emergency Galactic Council session," Daniel replied, forwarding the message to Kira's device. "A species called the Krathax have begun attacking both human and Valoran colonies. They are not interested in negotiation." Kira read through the reports. The Krathax were a militaristic civilization from beyond known space, and they had already destroyed 3 human colonies and 2 Valoran outposts in coordinated strikes. "The Council is calling for a joint response," Daniel said quietly. "They want representatives from both our governments to attend the emergency session." Kira stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at the stars. 6 months ago, this news would have filled her with dread. Another war, more death, more suffering, but now she felt something different. She had a partner who could help face this threat, and more importantly, she had proof that former enemies could become allies when they chose cooperation over conflict.